Mini episode 675 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode number 675. This is FDH managing partner Rick Morris. We've got a big one for you here today. We are delivering the climax of our anniversary week. This is the 9th anniversary of the FDH Lounge, going back to, of course, January 14th, 2007, that vaunted first broadcast that we did back when we were still broadcasting with what was the Sports Talk Network, sportstalknetwork.com back in the day. Had a lot of fun on that occasion, and it's been great ever since. 800-plus hours have followed in that format and in the subsequent format that we have been in. And this has been a great week of celebrating the program's anniversary with the FDH Lounge Pantheon. We, of course, finished publishing all of the Pantheon segments on the anniversary date here, January 14th, 2016. And it was a pleasure to be able to go through that with all the cast members who participated. And I want to thank everyone once again for helping make the FDH Lounge Pantheon as special as it was and as momentous. And it's great to be able to celebrate the anniversary of the program in one more way as well. And it's very fitting because before there was an FDH Lounge, before there was even that brand, the show, whatever, there was FantasyDraftHelp.com, still is, FantasyDraftHelp.com Insider. Previous to 2008, a standalone program, it folded into the FDHLounge.com. So it is great to be able to go back to our roots, so to speak, here. The FDH Lounge covering anything and everything in the world. We try to be the widest variety program out there. And, of course, with the FDH Lounge Pantheon this week and the inductees into it, we really kind of ran the spectrum on that. But it's always great to be able to get back to our roots and be able to do what we love to do with FantasyDraftHelp.com as well as the FDH Lounge, and that is to talk fantasy sports, and in this case particular, the most popular by far of all the fantasy sports out there, fantasy football. And while I'm on the hyperbole, to welcome back one of our favorite guests that we have had over the course of the FDH Lounge. We have really enjoyed being on with him previously. You can, of course, find him on Twitter at Swollen Dome, his website, swollendome.com. You may know him also from, and probably do, as Fox Sports fantasy sports expert, and, of course, Fox Sports Radio. You can catch him alongside Jason Smith, 8 to 11 Pacific, Monday through Friday, and alongside Brian Noe, 5 to 9 a.m. Sunday mornings. It's always been a lot of fun to discuss the fantasy landscape with this gentleman, and on this occasion of our program's 9th anniversary, it's great to be able to welcome him back on and be able to talk fantasy sports with him again. It was a wild 2015 fantasy football season, and I'm looking forward to really digging into this and seeing how much of it might be applicable to 2016, how much of it might just be a one-off this year. This gentleman can help answer those questions, as he always does. I speak, of course, of the great Mike Harmon, who we're, of course, big fans of, going way back. Mike, welcome back to the program today. How are you, sir?
Dominating on a Thursday afternoon. Happy anniversary to y'all. I feel like I should pop that bottle of champagne that's sitting in my fridge for no apparent reason.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I have no idea why it's sitting there, but, you know, hey, it's a good occasion to do it.
It really is. You'll be dominating the ear holes here, as you customarily do at Fox Sports Radio, of course. And I have, as I said, greatly enjoyed catching you there over the years and picking up your fantasy advice in all different types of forums here. And, again, before we get started with that, though, it's just some general football thoughts in terms of the base of operations of Fox Sports Radio. You got to be full of thoughts about the NFL's vaunted return to L.A. announced this week. It sounds like it might be one of these typical things, though, where the pendulum swings too far from one direction to the other. There's no excuse for L.A. not to have a team for 21 years, but for all the complaints over a period of time, well, There's so much to do out there. How much football can they support? We're going to go to 2 teams. Doesn't it seem like one is sort of equilibrium, at least at the start?
Now, let's push it as far as we can go. Why? Because the revenue, the TV revenue, the sales revenue, there's so much to sell against now that is much different than when they left 21 years ago, when we talk about TV and what becomes of a stadium, right? We're not talking just about a football stadium. Stan Kroenke's not interested in just a football stadium. He's talking about an entertainment megaplex in Inglewood, just off the 405. Granted, you'll be sitting on that exit for a while to get there, but we'll figure that out as we go. When you're looking at the plans of what they're trying to put there, you're talking about concerts, you're talking about retail space, you're talking about taking what the Patriots have built out with Gillette and taking that and supersizing it. That's what Stan Kroenke's vision is. He's a land developer. He's a guy that's looking, where's the money? And for Dean Spanos, look, Mark Davis just wants a home. He wants somebody to love him and just tell him that he loves him. I don't know what's going on there. There's a whole psychological profile we'll need to do. With Dean Spanos, he's got his opportunities if he wants to crawl back with his tail between his legs in San Diego. But the reality is, when you have the opportunity to come up the 5, 2.5 hours, and quadruple the value of your franchise by bringing it to L.A., this is all Steve Ballmer. Steve Ballmer should be getting a cut of all this from the NFL. So when we look at it, you go big or you go home, and the time is now.
Well, those are great points, Mike. And I have to tell you, talking off air this week with a good friend of mine, Ben Chu from that NBALotteryPick.com, we were kind of chewing over this a little bit. And I said to him that I kind of got the sense looking at it, mid-'90s when these teams left L.A. in the first place, or Anaheim in the case of the Rams. But it really seems pretty quaint compared to right now, doesn't it? It almost seems like it was a lot longer ago than 20 years because, as you say, the marriage of entertainment with football, all these different things that the L.A. market has to bring, that really wasn't in anybody's consciousness in the mid-'90s here. Nobody really had a vision to do something like this. It really is a testament of how much times have changed over the span of 2 short decades, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, we just look at what the game has become in 2 short decades. I mean, we go back to, we're gearing up for Super Bowl 50, and I don't know how Santa Clara is going to handle it. I'm curious to watch that unfold over the course of the week in terms of traffic flow and where events are and everything. But they built a new facility. Does it have the bells and whistles that make it, the Jerry Jones Palace? No. And it's kind of gotten the middling reviews in that regard, unless you go into the bowels of it where all the good sports bars and everything are and all the museums. But when you start talking about where we're at with the NFL, you look at the television revenue. You look at where the dollars and cents are coming. Sure, you need butts and seats, and you're going to sell giant skyboxes and stadium seats, in the great kind of, I don't even know how to best describe it. It's just the blueprints here. I want to haul a museum for all of the failed stadia efforts here and all those models to be displayed to us all. But this has just become so much bigger than it was 20 years ago. The money has just gone up exponentially. We talk about extra commas into what the league's bringing in each and every year, and it keeps going on unabated. So the return to Los Angeles was inevitable. And, I've gotten into a lot of fights with folks in Missouri, and I mean no harm. But the city of St. Louis, not the county of St. Louis, city of St. Louis has shrunk by 30% in the last decade. That is a fact.
Yeah.
People have moved to the suburbs. People have moved out. Their tax base is lower, and they put together a very innovative plan. And I know there were a number of initiatives to try to engage younger workers, to engage and guarantee minority hiring, and there was a lot of good. But as we know, dollars and cents win out, and they may end up getting backfilled with Oakland before it's all over. Again, Mark Davis desperate to do a deal with somebody, and Jerry Jones right now the most powerful guy in the room. You saw him; he was the cock of the walk when that was all done on Tuesday. So he's going to be the voice that needs to be swayed wherever football lands next.
Oh, that's absolutely right. And it's funny you mentioned about the Museum of Failed Opportunities there. I saw your mention of that on Twitter earlier on. It kind of put me in mind of my hometown here, the city of Cleveland, over the years, it's been kind of a similar thing with the lakefront. I remember reading things that back in the 1960s, somebody was like, we're going to build a big thing out on Lake Erie, and we're going to build out onto there. I mean, there's all kinds of futuristic things that people have come up with over a period of time. You are right about that as far as the L.A. Stadia, because that Carson one looked pretty sweet when it was on the drawing board, and there have been other things out there. I know Al Davis was playing footsie with some of the municipalities. You probably remember which one's better than me, but there's all kinds of things that have come and gone. You're right about that.
Well, just up the road, my wife works in El Segundo, which is right near LAX, the big international airport, for those that don't know the acronym. Please come out and visit us. We'd love to see you, especially once that stadium opens, in case we need some seat fillers. So please. But you have they have old practice fields that are now soccer fields, where the Raiders used to be when they were here in L.A., and I have to wonder aloud, nobody's spoken to this point directly, but how much did the sins of Al Davis focus on Mark in terms of his desire to move and be part of L.A. again? You know, all the lawsuits that were filed and all the angst and hand-wringing that went down for years of litigation and infighting, etc. And again, when you're looking at the city of Oakland can't help, you're looking at the idea of rebuilding a stadium there. You're not going to get public support in terms of the O.co. There's only so much you can do because you still have the A's who are locked in because of the Giants and all of that fighting that's been going on forever. They'd love to go play down by where the 49ers have located, where there's some land down in Santa Clara and San Jose, but it's still caught up in litigation. So there's just a lot going on, but it's just the scope and the scale of this all has just gotten so huge. And when you look at, the second largest market in the country without a team for 21 years, especially now that we've entered the full-on TV, embrace technology kind of, pylon cams in the national title game and all this other stuff, we're better than where special effects live here in Los Angeles. And eventually I think these other places get upgraded, wondering if there isn't possibly something where the NFL comes in as a partner with the Raiders and maybe builds the stadium and then just makes Mark Davis a tenant. There's a lot of ways this can work out, because certainly they want more luxury boxes and they don't want the eyesore that the O.co has become.
Absolutely. And with all this talk of wealth and greed and excess, it's a perfect segue actually to the first fantasy question I wanted to ask you. In terms of 2015, it's really, really strange in the one sense that we don't tend to think of any one year or any other year being particularly momentous in terms of the fantasy industry. It's been kind of a slow growth over the period of the last 20 years or so. The big companies like your employer, ESPN, CBS Sports, kind of taking over as the premier providers of fantasy sports games, Yahoo and some of the other ones. These things kind of tend to happen glacially, but in terms of the daily fantasy sports subsector of the industry, I wonder if there might be a chance where we look back at this year as both sort of the rise and the fall. You look at the insane amount of ad money that was out there. I think that there was more ad money spent than by any other company in America. I think it was either by DraftKings or them combined with FanDuel the first week or two of the season. And then this regulatory backlash that has really kind of come their way on that. They got bigger than they'd ever been very quickly, and then there's a sense of whether or not the bubble is bursting right about now. So what's your sense of this heading into 2016?
Well, it always comes back to everybody wants their piece of the pie. And why this is getting litigated is it grew very fast. Now, it had been out there for a few years. This was stuff we kicked around years ago when people would write in saying, hey, I'm a commissioner of a league. What should I do with Week 17? And I'd say, well, we got to find a way to play it. Create your own, 1-week draft or bubble it up into the week 16 and 17 together. However, but that was the genesis, and it started to fester a little bit, and slowly but surely those leagues started to go, and then people looking for places to put their money. Suddenly you got the VCs coming forward saying, well, this looks like a growth, and they get in, and all the states that didn't have a piece of the pie, they still many of them have the state lottery that they siphon off their dollars. Well, if they could have gotten a chunk of the daily fantasy leagues and made sure that was all buttoned up legalese-wise, we wouldn't have any of these fights.
Absolutely, yeah. Never let us forget that a lot of the state lotteries out there are based on the old numbers game that when it was being run underground was like the most evil thing ever. It's a tax on poor people. It's corrupting. But yeah, when the state's involved, when the state, and again, I'm not necessarily trying to take the side of those fantasy companies that are making that claim.
No,
but
certainly.
There is validity. Sure.
Yeah, no, it's just an overarching statement. Now, in the end, we'll see some area of compromise, and we've already got the news out of New York in terms of the extended stay as this gets dealt with. But it's just the idea of when you have a disruptive industry, whether it's any of the tech companies and PayPal and all those things, when they came out, there was a lot of question. eBay, how do you get appropriate tax when people start selling off tons of stuff online? And they're still trying to grapple with that years later. So it was no surprise that when you have this go from 0 to 100 as fast as it did, that there'd be some backlash. And certainly, as a consumer of sports, I can understand where at some point perhaps you'd said, okay, I've seen enough ads. I hope that there's the same outrage when there's the next Viagra ad that comes on. It's like, we kind of know this exists. Okay, you can move on, and you have to go through that, or here's the next Coca-Cola or Pepsi ad. It's like, yeah, we know who you are. The beer companies, they're creative, but yes, unless it's a microbrew, your brand awareness is pretty well known. So I think we got into that same category here, and since it was the new thing that they hadn't gotten their 2 cents out of, it got the rancor of legislators, and certainly in an election year, as we get closer to the big election and those in local municipalities, it's a chance to stake your claim to some part of your constituency and start shaking your fist and saying, I'm for making sure I protect everybody. And well, who doesn't think that might help a point or two in the polls?
That's true. Yeah, that's definitely a consideration. In terms of looking at it with intellectual honesty, I have to say, I mean, I've kind of staked out a position that's kind of a minority one among those commenting on the fantasy sports world, and that being this whole thing that, OMG, there's no connection to gambling whatsoever. I will say this, when I was out in Vegas, like way before the daily fantasy sports industry amounted to anything, I remember seeing parlay cards on Sundays at the casinos, pair up these wide receivers, running backs, quarterbacks, et cetera. And as far as a lot of the people playing it, you can very clearly tell the instant gratification of it as opposed to what we do over the season-long fantasy sports gaming. It does kind of hit the pleasure centers of the brain in much the same way. I need the Browns to cover tonight. Well, God help me if that was ever the case. But you know what I'm saying as far as one team covering.
Well, I forget what their record against the spread was, but yeah, I get your point.
Yeah. So I can understand a lot of the arguments that the daily fantasy sports industry is making, but in terms of intellectual honesty, when they try to claim that it's the furthest thing in the world from gambling, does it not start to crumble at least a little bit at that point?
I don't think you can go on any soapbox and proclaim it's 100% one way or the other.
Uh-huh.
I think we all have to agree that there's some level of skill in terms of producing a lineup. Look, you can write your algorithms, and if you have
Sure.
the seed money by which to back yourself into, a huge amount of entries, much like, the Powerball that everybody lost their mind on and that every local municipality gave 10 to 15 minutes of their coverage yesterday, regardless of what was going on in their city, that we have to be real with ourselves. Like, yes, there's still a lot of luck involved that you can't control in terms of a play, right? Like just when we're doing our fantasy analysis and giving our hot plays and what we call it, Dan Byer and myself, on the Sunday. For whatever reason, Twitter was not updating my bio. But what we did with the fantasy show was hot plays and cold sores. I could be right for 58 minutes and 48 seconds of the game. And you know what? That garbage touchdown, much like the backdoor cover in Clemson, Alabama, destroys all of the analysis that I did. I'm right on the money, and then a DB slips. Say Joe Hayden slips. And all of a sudden, he didn't play. But that you had the opportunity downfield for that 80-yard touchdown that suddenly makes for a 387 and a score game. There's nothing I could do about that. I called it right all day until, footing took me down. So much like that in daily fantasy leagues, and for that matter, when you go back to the season long, yes, you have to play the wire, but you still have to have the bit of luck. So I think we're somewhere in the middle. I'm not quite sure what percentage to put on it, but anybody that's wagging their fingers and trying to proclaim one way or the other, I think is kidding themselves.
That sounds pretty reasonable. And I'll tell you, as far as what you said about the Powerball, yeah, I can tell you from my home market of Cleveland, if we were to break out like a color graph, it would be half devoted to the Powerball from yesterday and half devoted to Hugh Jackson. I literally don't think they talked about anything else, including the weather, on a bad weather day. So,
right.
I think that's...
Well, I mean, out here, the first winner was announced from a town about an hour from where we broadcast in Sherman Oaks, California. And we had the local news on, and they stayed outside that facility for virtually the entire show. As hundreds of people flocked to take pictures with the clerk who sold the ticket and with the owner of that establishment. It was amazing. And you know who got the most screen time? A guy holding a giant Pittsburgh Steelers flag behind the newscaster.
I did see that.
At no point did they wave him away. There he was waving a giant Steelers flag as they went on. But, you know, here's a little piece of information for you that I think is kind of interesting. We talked to the guy at our local, we'll call it a convenience store. All right, it's the liquor store, a block from where we broadcast. And he said he'd been in his position for 11 hours, hadn't moved, just sold tickets all day up until the cutoff, sold over $20,000 worth of tickets in one location. On one day, they get 6 cents per ticket sold.
Oh,
it's not a bad haul to just kind of keep turning and taking money and handing tickets back to people. That's on top of whatever actual liquor and cigarette, whatever other business you do that day. It's a pretty good run.
Free money, and I'm sure none of the people that were in there were spending money that they shouldn't be spending. I'm sure this is all just free and clear money, you know, that is not going to harm anyone's lives. So,
well,
that's
you know what's
wonderful.
funny is that's the other debate out here already with the stadium and football coming to L.A. It's like, oh, who's going to be able to afford to go to these games? It's like, okay, you don't go to Applebee's twice this week. You don't go have drinks with your buddy on Friday night. You put that money and think of it as a, well, not quite swear jar, but the same type of principle. Voila, after 2 weeks, you've got your money to go to a game with your kids and your wife. Not everybody needs a hat bought at the stadium or 4 hot dogs and all the other nonsense that they put into those surveys. If you just want to get into the game, you'll be just fine.
Yep, it's all about budgeting. You're right about that. Aside from daily fantasy sports, the other overarching story of this season from a fantasy perspective, clearly, the epidemic of injuries, including and especially perhaps those of high-profile athletes. So it's a thing where the fact that it pretty much seemed worse than a lot of people could ever remember it being, you just wonder if it's the kind of fluky thing and if the pendulum kind of swings back the other way next year and the year after, or if perhaps this is portending something else. The fact that it was such a wide variety of injuries on different surfaces, not all, uniform surfaces, and et cetera, it wouldn't appear to be any kind of grand pattern that we should be worried about going forward. But what do you make of such a horrible year in terms of star talent just staying healthy and being on the field?
Bigger, faster, stronger. I think there is some credence to the idea of while you're training on your own, the fact that you can't get into the facilities and that they cut down all these practice days and you can't coach them up quite like you did. Look, I'm not looking for guys to be ground down in 100-degree heat. That's not what I'm saying whatsoever. But I think there's some credence to that. The new CBA, to some level, is the worst enemy of the players, and it's a deal that's coming back on them and all of us in certain ways. Some, you're not getting access to the trainers, so you're not getting the full year-round with them. And you've got your own guys, and that's fine, but they're not the team guys. They're not the guys that are trained necessarily in football-related conditioning. And then you talk about the sloppiness of play. I mean, we watch it each and every week. Well, one, we don't know what a catch is because of the rules committee, and it's good that Jeff Fisher kept his job at least short term. Why? Because he's been through a move before, and on the competition committee, he can go through all this stuff for us and help guys get set up in Los Angeles. But the idea is, tackling is horrible. Inline blocking is awful. You got wide receivers who are worse on the route tree, and game decision by time management and game condition and situation management by coaches, I don't believe has ever been worse. So I think we've got a little bit there. That, and at some point, we got to look at the size of these guys and wondering, not that it's ever been healthy to run in, collide into other men, and anybody that ever thought that was okay was foolish as well. But you have the idea of the bigger, faster, stronger. You got guys that are 6'2", running 4.4s to go meet up and collide with wide receivers. I mean, we saw the perfect hit on Antonio Brown. Whether you believe or don't that it was dirty, he still knocked him around a little bit. And we see hits like that all the time, and they start to add up. And as far as the season-ending injuries, is it a recency bias? I'd have to look at the overall stats, but it sure seemed like we saw a lot more blows to big-name players and more backups having to be combed off the wire than ever before. Made for an exciting fantasy season in some regards, but certainly it lessened the product on the field.
It did, and again, I don't, from the preliminary data I've looked at, I don't think it's prisoner of the moment to say that it's worse this year than it's been really kind of historically, as far as the amount of bad injuries that were suffered out there and the effect on the fantasy game. But taking that a step further, you mentioned the injury to Antonio Brown, and of course that's the kind of thing that is always prone to happen to wide receivers coming against the middle or over the middle, even as they've legislated against that kind of stuff over the years. You still do sort of have that, whereas running backs obviously have their own set of perils that they're up against. But there has been, obviously, I'd say almost from the beginning of fantasy football as a thing, this sort of bias in the first round and maybe even the second towards running backs. And we've seen it sort of evening out a little over the last couple of years. But I'm wondering if we might look back on 2015 as a year where we kind of maybe cross to the other side and people's attitudes might be different, because, I mean, that was a killing field at number one running back that Paul Pott would envy. They were all going down this year. I mean, wide receivers, the top flight ones, they look like the safer bets as a class up against the top running backs. Do they not going into next year?
Oh, there's no question about it. I mean, and I think to some degree people have to start casting an eye back on quarterbacks who we wanted to devalue altogether. I'm certainly not going to lead the rush to it, because certainly it was the wait and see for most. But when you look at the running backs, what do you have? 3 guys out of your top 10, maybe 4 that you expected to be in the top 12? You've got Adrian Peterson finishes second in points. You got Todd Gurley, who everybody wished and hoped. So say he was at the back end of that top 12. Lamar Miller got there. It wasn't pretty, but he got there. And then you got Matt Forte. Beyond that, you're looking at a significant drop of Devonta Freeman, who wasn't a starter. He's the number 1 guy. Doug Martin, who was written off as dead based on the way that team's been constructed, and running behind a bad offensive line with a rookie quarterback. The fact that he had more runs of 20 yards plus than any other running back is fairly amazing, although someone dangling a giant contract in front of him certainly didn't hurt. David Johnson, even though he played half a season, finishes as a top 10 guy. So certainly a topsy-turvy world, and depending on how deep your league was, it was probably pretty exciting if you were in shallow leagues in terms of your bench. In terms of waiver wire activity, getting back to the old wink, wink, nod, nod, free agent acquisition budget of fictional dollars being sent on waiver wire players, I'm sure it made it pretty exciting and pretty pricey in a lot of leagues.
I can guess that was definitely the case most places, but you touched a little bit there on the quarterback position as well. There were the 2 big guys coming into this year who both, to whatever degree, and for a number of reasons, really underperformed. Of course, Rodgers and Luck. Curious what you think of them and how much it affects their stock going into next year, as well as with this year that Cam Newton had without Kelvin Benjamin, which was really, I think, shocking to so many people out there. Wondering if he might have thrust himself in the conversation for number 1 overall when you're talking about quarterbacks in the first round.
Yeah, pretty amazing run. I mean, obviously we would expect the regression to the mean, to use those fancy math terms, in terms of his rushing capabilities. I mean, the fact that he ran for 10 touchdowns in the regular season, I would wager, now we're talking about wagering again, a large amount of money that he doesn't get back to that number a year from now. And then the 35 touchdowns with the let's call it what it is. It was Greg Olson, the Thor lookalike,
Yep.
and a band of merrymen coming into the year. Ted Ginn Jr. becomes more than a return man and catches fire. Amazing. I don't know that I'm going to put him number one because I'm going to look for a regression, especially when I see that large rushing total and how much that
Yep.
boosted it. That leaves me a little unnerved, not to mention the giant leap in touchdowns, 3.5 touchdowns per interception. I would expect, again, a little bit regression there, especially if they can get any semblance of consistency from the run game, because as soon as Jonathan Stewart started getting banged up, that's when Cam Newton's numbers really elevated. But the usual suspects sitting there, Brady, Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers. Even though Brees and Rodgers were so inconsistent, they still finish as top 7 quarterbacks, and that leaves you a little uneasy of the way it goes because I want more consistency. So they'll probably drop a little bit, Brees as he ages, and curious to see how that team takes shape this coming year with Aaron Rodgers, so long as Jordy Nelson is back and they make maybe 1 or 2 moves to find, I don't know, an offensive lineman who hasn't spent half the year on injured reserve somewhere, that they'll be fine. Yeah. Although they're still alive here in the playoffs and still looking to make some noise despite all the issues they've had and Eddie Lacy's on-again, off-again performance. So it's an interesting time at the quarterback position, especially when my guy, Blake Bortles, suddenly rises to the number 4 quarterback in fantasy stats, even though they stink.
How about that? Yeah, he with a little bit better skill position talent to work with there. It was a nice progression by him in that same division. When you talk about progression to the mean as opposed to the regression potentially of Cam Newton, Andrew Luck. Obviously, it's going to be a bounce back, but to what degree? I mean, I don't think people are going to be putting him on Mount Olympus in 2016 the way they were coming into this past year, but how close do you think he comes to getting back to that point?
Well, I thought it gave everybody an opportunity to really go back and try to dissect, particularly when Matt Hasselbeck is winning games. Now, he's not putting up gaudy monster fantasy numbers on a week-to-week basis, but a lot of Andrew Luck's numbers come from the fact that he makes so many mistakes. And I don't think anything's going to change. So he'll continue to make errant throws and put them in bad positions where he's got to be in comeback mode. And let's face it, as much as we'd like to tell ourselves that the division got better, and Houston's got a solid defense, they still don't have a quarterback. Tennessee's still Tennessee, as much as we may like Marcus Mariota. And I like the Jacksonville offense. Dante Fowler Jr., is he enough to say that suddenly they're going to be competitive defensively? No, they still have a ways to go. So Indianapolis can get right back to its rightful place of the last 2 decades as a bum slayer in that division, which means Andrew Luck will put up his numbers.
Absolutely. And in terms of a guy who was an inexplicable breakthrough, I mean, we saw some of them this year, obviously Freeman in Atlanta, Barnage in Cleveland, et cetera, but the one to just blow everybody away because it happened mid-season, it happened after several years of being a mediocrity at best at fantasy wide receiver, Doug Baldwin. So what do you make of him going into next year? I mean, he's now proven he can do it, which he really literally never had before mid-season this year. So it would seem like you don't want to price him next year at what he did this year in the second half, but how much of that do you think is for real? How much of that do you think when they get some film on figuring out what he did to break out that he may slip a little?
Still a mid-number 2 guy, maybe back-end number 2. He's not going to be as low as he was because obviously they still have Jimmy Graham. They have to figure out what he's going to do. Now, remember, this all happened as soon as he stopped pretending to block when he got hurt. As soon as they put an inline blocker that could actually seal things and it wasn't just pretending, they suddenly were able to move the football. Likewise, I still think that when you look at Seattle over the long haul, and for now they don't have it because you're looking at Kristen Michael and Fred Jackson and whatever they can cobble together in the running game, you've switched to Russell Wilson and his passing downfield. I think that they go back to balance as soon as they're capable, whether Marshawn Lynch moves on and his action goes somewhere else, that they find a way to make it a balanced offense again. Because I don't know that Pete Carroll wants to live in this, all right, we're a pass-happy attack. I don't know that he wants to do that, one, for Russell Wilson's longevity, but 2, just grind out games and move on, succeed and proceed to steal from John Calipari. So I think for Doug Baldwin, he's a guy that I would look at him in that 13 to 18 range coming in, unless they decide to not upgrade at the running back position and leave it in Russell Wilson's hands.
That sounds just about perfect to me as far as when you're trying to balance the upside and the downside. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, figuring him in that range. And as you point out, ancillary effects on the effectiveness of Russell Wilson and what his passing numbers are going to be next year if they revert to a little bit more balance. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But
we just look at it's a tale of two halves as you go through.
Right.
I mean, he had 92 and a touchdown against the Packers. Other than that, he hadn't top 40 receiving yards in any other game before Week 10. It's awful hard to suddenly push all the chips to the table on a guy who's got a few years in the league saying, all right, now he finally gets it. So I'm a little reticent to do so.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I wanted to ask you about him in particular, because guys like that, breakout cases like that are so rare, where there's just like literally no clue whatsoever that the light bulb's going to go on and they're going to be able to capitalize. And a very interesting story, part of a very weird 2015 fantasy football landscape. We'll have to see how much things regress to the mean as far as weirdness in 2016. But regardless, as it's all going on, everybody should be checking out, of course, everything you got going on. Fox Sports Radio, Monday through Friday, 8 to 11 p.m. Pacific time with Jason Smith, and then the Sunday show, 5 to 9 a.m. I always enjoy catching you, Mike, and enjoy your site, swollendome.com, where you kind of open it up a little bit with some of the variety also. A real pleasure to have you on, as it always is. Thank you for celebrating our 9th anniversary with us, sir.
All right, I'm going to go pop that champagne. You'll be drunk vicariously through me.
I will indeed. I thank you so much, Mike. Always a pleasure. Thank you for being on, and thank you, everybody, for joining us for our 9th anniversary special edition here, mini episode number 675 of the FDH Lounge.
As we bring the show to a close, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, all Clear Channel affiliates, TNT, TBS, USA, UPN, Deadspin.com, YouTube.com, YTMND.com, MySpace.com, various blogs, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, IamBoard.com, Billboard.com, Google.com, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN Classic, NBA TV, NFL Network, Sports Time Ohio, Athlon Magazine, Comedy Central, Cartoon Network, The Boomerang Channel, QVC, BET, The Spice Channel, Steno Notebooks, Manwich, Papermate Office Supplies, waitresses, strippers, bartenders, garbage men, janitors, microwave popcorn, the writers of The Office, Scrubs, Entourage, My Name is Earl, Oz, Metalocalypse and the Boondocks, Aquafina, and the Periodic Table of Elements.